treaty-making power in the United States and the treaty-making power in Australia are very different. We follow the British system, and that is making a treaty is a matter of the prerogative, the royal prerogative. That is, the government advises the Crown to enter into a treaty, and Parliament is not involved except to the extent that the government agrees, and it develops a practice of telling Parliament what they're doing in relation to treaties. However, to give any legal effect internally to a treaty, to change the law in relation to a treaty, legislation is necessary in Australia. You can't change the laws of Australia under a treaty, whereas the treaty has international legal effect. It can only have domestic effect if there is a law. The High Court did, of course, try to change that, but Parliament became so agitated that the High Court retreated on that point. In the United States, though, the situation is completely different. The President has power to make a treaty with the advice and consent of the Senate, which requires 2/3 of the senators present agreeing to that treaty. But such is the real life of politics, that the American government enters into treaties. They're not called treaties. It enters into agreements with other countries, and they're not put to the Senate as a formal treaty. And one of the most famous in recent years was the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. That is the agreement between the United States and Iran in relation...
With a dozen other parties.
And yes, major European parties. And that involved the release of vast amounts of money, which the United States had withheld, as well as the delivery, strangely, of a vast amount of cash in a plane delivered to Tehran airport. Why they wanted cash is not clear. But, John, I'm wondering what you think of the two different methods of entering into treaties. In practical, just as a practical matter, I think they're to an extent rather similar. The reason why you need the approval of the Senate is a treaty then can change the law of the United States. So naturally you need the approval of the Senate, whereas a treaty made by the Crown in Australia can't change domestic law. So perhaps the way we do it. We therefore enter into many more treaties than the United States. We, a minor power, have many, many more treaties than the United States. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I do think that it's interesting that you mentioned the joint treaty with Iran. And I don't believe that was approved by the Senate. I think that was put through as an executive action, was it not?
Yes, it was actually the President's action was approved, and a handful of Republicans, not as a treaty. It was his action was approved, and there were a few senators who opposed it, including Senator Rubio and Senator Cruz. There were 2 or 3 others. Strangely, most Republicans went along with the arrangement.
Right. Well,
this was pre-Trump, of course.
Yes, exactly. The prior administration,
who denounced the agreement, who withdrew from the agreement with Tehran.
Yeah, the current administration did. Yes, it was passed by the previous administration, the Obama administration. Yeah. I think I don't know if I have a really clear opinion on if one of those is a better system than the other, frankly. I do think that there has been some erosion of the separation of powers and the checks on powers in the U.S. For example, a president cannot declare war without Congress. Yet you've got military actions all through the last several decades that have not, there's been no war declared. They call it a police action, or they come up with some clever term. And so I think there's been, the pendulum swings, of course, but I think, the idea of the founders, and as you know, the original 13 colonies, under the Articles of Confederation, they all had their own foreign policy. Each state would do their own treaties with whomever they like. And that was one of the necessary things that they needed to rectify, was commerce and giving that treaty-making power to the executive branch. So I don't know if I think one is better than the other. I don't think it should be easy to do. I think that is interesting that you point out that Australia has many, many more treaties than America does because of the difficulty in getting that passed. So I would have to look at that more closely to really form an opinion on it. But
there is one other matter which I think is relevant, and it comes back to Switzerland. In Switzerland, for example, to have Switzerland join a major international organization, that has to be approved in advance by the people. And I should imagine that there is a power and I think it has been exercised, a power to hold a referendum on a treaty which has been entered into by the government of Switzerland. Should we have a similar power in Australia?
I like that idea. Mm-hmm. I like the Swiss model of the more direct democracy than we have and that America has.
I think that would be very popular in Australia. There is, I think, out there in the electorate a reservation about some of our international treaties, and it would be an interesting situation if we had that power.